talk about your recent Western novel, The Valley of Red Shadows, and where it fits both in Old West literature and the kind of sort of spaghetti westerns and Western films that we saw over the last few decades.
Well, first off, there's no article. It's just Valley of Red Shadows, and uh, that's important because it's not. If I there is a valley, well, it's basically set in the Wild Bill. What's his name? Uh, Pecos Bill country, I call it, the Texas of the imagination. It's set in 1850, and I have various places around Texas that are sort of mythic because Texas, if you look at old maps, and I like old maps, was sort of uh, unmapped at that time, uncharted. It was in a different shape than it eventually came to be a part of it, fingered up into what's now Colorado. It included maybe about a fifth of what's now New Mexico, parts of Oklahoma, and a couple of other states, even a little bit of Kansas. Um, but it's set in 1850, and there is a Valley of Red Shadows, which is presumably a valley where some Indian tribes were doing various hoodoo over the centuries in the book, but it also refers to some of the interior landscapes of some of the characters. One of the characters is a female character who is a character from an earlier book of Norwegian in the Family, but this is set decades, over half a century earlier than the earliest we see that character. Um, and I chose the title because there's Into the Valley of the Shadow of Death. It has kind of a biblical sound to it, and these characters are all sort of haunted by different things in their past. But and also the reference to Indians, to blood, and whatnot. Um, it's set in the same fictive universe as all of my fictional prose books, and so there are ancestor characters to characters that appear in other works. Um, it's it sort of takes on and deconstructs a lot of the Western archetypes. The subtitle of the book is called The Hero because it's the first of three books in what I'm calling the heroic trilogy. It's the first one, this Western Valley of Red Shadows, is subtitled The Hero. The next book is going to be called The Super Seven. It's a spy thriller, and it's going to be subtitled The Anti-Hero. And the final book is going to be called I've got a title for it, but The Edge of the Shown, which is going to be a sci-fi book set on another world, and that's going to be called The Superhero. And it's all three main characters are called Elias Walker. They're a family that is entwined with the real life Bush Walker family that has produced, as we record, two presidents and other political figures throughout American history, along with the Kennedys, probably the most successful political family in American political history. Or maybe the Roosevelts might top them with two presidents. So the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, and the Bushes. Um, and basically, the hero isn't particularly heroic. Uh, the bad guys tend to win, uh, and a lot of it's subverted. It's more about the time and the place. And like most of my books, it's a western, but it's a western because it's set in the West. It's not a western because it's necessarily following the old conventions. I always try to break the genre because there's no sense in doing a genre book. I think just as like earlier books were crime books, but they really weren't about the crimes being committed. And it's a relatively short book, but whereas in some of my longer books, like A Norwegian in the Family or the Vincetti Brothers, I went for total immersion by having deep conversations where whole paragraphs or even whole conversations were sort of blocks of meaning and could take on a meaning deeper than what's being said. In this book, which is 163,000 words versus 600,000 or so for Vincetti and almost 2.5 million for the Norwegian book. This is only 163,000 words, and what's left out is almost as important as what's left in, because oftentimes I'll give you a trope that's heading somewhere, and if you're familiar enough with Western genres, or whatever genre I might be doing, you're going to know where it's going, so I don't have to tell you. And so you get sort of this these different tropes coming back and forth and seeming to cross, but sometimes if you turn it around, two things that look like they're coming together, if you turn them that way, are actually just going past each other. Um, and so, as far as like uh, other aspects, you mentioned Sergio Leone, and Leone and his spaghetti westerns basically turned a lot of those western film genres on its head, and sort of this book sort of does the same. It's also very comic. There's a few comic characters in it. The major comic character in the book is called Cookie Jasmine. He's the cook for the hero and his band, and he's also an ancestor character of a character that has appeared in 3 or 4 short stories that I've done. A character called Clint Jasma, who's based on a real life person I knew many years ago when I was working in Minnesota. So that's basically this book. It's in a sense a continued evolution of the prose, in that reached a peak with immersive qualities that I was doing in A Norwegian in the Family. This book is sort of a U-turn in that it's pulling back. I did a little bit of that in the final book of my New York Quartet, 64. This book takes that farther, and I'll probably, in the 2 remaining books of this trilogy, go even farther with that, and then see where I'm going to do when I do some later books. So that's basically a summary of this book.